Hey everyone, welcome to Frame Academy Project 4, Part 4. This one's called Modifying Your Scene with JavaScript. So in the previous part of this project, we introduced JavaScript. I showed you how to make a new JavaScript file in Glitch. You made your first component, which we called disappear. And in this component, we defined a few JavaScript variables. Remember, a variable is kind of like a container that stores information. It could be a number, it could be a text string, and it could be a few other things, as we'll learn later. And once you made this component, you also had it log those variables to the console. Finally, back in your HTML file, you brought that component file, the JavaScript file that you made, into your project with a script element, as we've learned before. And then we also had added the component to an entity. And remember, the component was called disappear. So we had added disappear to the scene. Then when you loaded the scene, our console logs with the variable appeared. Now in this part, we're actually going to make our disappear component do what it's supposed to do, which is make whatever it's clicked on disappear. And to do this, we're going to write our very first JavaScript function. Now, we learn variables, right? A variable is like just a storage container that can hold information. A function in JavaScript is some code that actually does something. It could change something in your scene. It's something kind of interactive. You can even modify the HTML with a JavaScript function. So you can do all sorts of things with functions, and that's kind of where they get their name, right? They have a purpose. They do something. They're a function. So there are a few ways to write JavaScript functions. I'm going to show you one, but I actually encourage you to look around for other JavaScript learning resources. There are many of them out there, and you'll find that there are often a few ways to do the same thing. Okay, and I'm just going to be showing you one of them in these tutorials, but don't think that it's the only way or that it's even necessarily the best way, right? I think for this purpose, it will be the best way. And if you learn otherwise, please let me know. I'm always happy to learn myself. Okay, so I'm back in my disappear.js JavaScript file, which is where we define these variables. We did these console logs. But now right below that, I'm going to write my first function. Okay? And reminder, below the video, I also break all of this down below. Okay? And if you have any questions, as always, head to our online community. It's a friendly place. You can ask questions and chat with each other. Okay, so let's write our first function. When it starts off, on this line here, just as with the variable, right, I'm using this let keyword, and then I'm giving my function a name. It's good practice to name the function kind of something that hints at what it does, right? So I'm going to call it disappear func. Func is sort of short for like function. So just with this let disappear func, I'm naming the function disappear func, and I'm saying equals just as I did with a variable. And then I'm actually going to say, okay, what is the function? Now, first I've got these blank parentheses. Normally this is where you'd put something called a function parameter, but because the function that we're making right now doesn't need any parameters, we're actually not even going to go over what these are. We will when we need to, right? For now, it's okay just to have it blank, right? Just blank parentheses. Then you'll see this funny sign. It's just a combination of two signs. It's an equals and then the right arrow. Okay. And then you see curly braces. And it's in between these curly braces that you write the code that will run or execute when your function is called. So what we're doing here is actually defining the function. We're saying what this disappear func is, but we're not actually calling it or running the code. We'll do that later, okay? For now, we're just doing what is the function, okay? What does it do? What is its function? So it's in between these curly braces that we put that code that will run when the function is called. Okay, now we've got a complicated looking line of code here that we're just going to break down piece by piece, so don't worry if it just looks totally strange, okay? It should look strange. First, we've got this. Now, this is a very important and powerful sort of word in JavaScript, and what it lets you do is it lets you reference whatever entity in your HTML that the component gets attached to. So this might not make sense at first, but this disappear component eventually, right, we're going to put it on some entities in our scene. Maybe the floor, so that when you click on the floor, it disappears. So you see I've actually already put the disappear component on it. Now, this, in the context of our floor, this will actually refer to the floor. Okay? It'll refer to whatever this entity, the component, is attached to. Now you'll see I also have disappear on one of these wall planes. Okay. Now in the context of the wall, this would refer to this entity, right? The wall. So this is actually what makes it so that we could put our disappear component on any entity we want, and it will still work, right? Because this will just always refer to whatever entity the component is attached to. It's really powerful. Now, .l just lets you take this and then reference its element so that we can modify its attributes. Now, remember, these are all attributes, right? Like ID, rotation, width, height, all of these other components that are on our element. We define them all with these attributes, right? Height equals 30. Disappear itself is an HTML attribute. Okay, so we need to kind of not just reference this, but then also its element in order to modify its attributes. So we have this .l dot, and then we have this other bit of JavaScript that is hugely important. We're going to see it all the time, called set attribute. And what this bit of JavaScript lets you do is modify or add attributes to your HTML entities. And that's really powerful because if you think about it, what that lets you do, it would let you add a component to an entity. It would let you change its rotation, or change its width, or change its height, or really modify any of the components or attributes and their properties through the JavaScript. So you can make it so that when something is clicked, its rotation changes, or its width changes, or you add the disappear component to it. You can do all sorts of things with set attribute. And the way set attribute works is it's followed by parentheses, regular parentheses, and then it takes two values, sometimes more, but in this case, two. And always first in quotation marks comes the name of the attribute that you are setting. And in this case, the attribute that I want to set is visible, because visible is an A-frame component that controls something's visibility, and it can only be true or false. So it's simple enough to work with, right? And remember again what our disappear component is doing, right? We want something that if it's clicked, it will disappear, right? Its visibility will be false. So that's what we're setting here. That's why we have visible as the first value. And then for the second value, you're setting what you want that attribute, the value of that attribute to be. In this case, we want false, right? We want it to disappear. So a quick review, okay? And I know, your first time with JavaScript functions, it's going to be something you have to get your head around, and let this be one of hopefully many other learning resources that you're working with to understand it. But with let disappear func, we're naming our function, and the function itself starts out with these empty parentheses. Normally you'd have function parameters here, but our function doesn't need any, so we don't have any. Equals and the right arrow, and then in the curly braces we have the code that will run when our function is called, and this code starts out with this, and this lets you reference whatever entity the component happens to be attached to. .l, so that we can reference that entity's underlying HTML element, letting us access and modify its attributes and components. And then .setAttribute, which will let us actually set an attribute on the HTML entity. And remember, because you use attributes to set components onto your entities, this essentially lets you add and modify components to your entities. We have visible first in the parentheses for set attribute, because visible is the name of the attribute that we're setting. Corresponds to this A-frame component. Visible can either be true or false. And the second value is false, because this is where you set, all right, what value do you want to set for this attribute? And then finally, we close our curly braces because the function is over. Okay, so that is our disappear function. Now, as I said before, just because we define the function doesn't mean it actually runs. So what you have to do to actually run a function is call it. So this defines the function, but we still need to call it in order for it to do its thing. Now, we don't want to call it as soon as the scene runs, because that'll just make it disappear. And if you remember, what we want to do is make it so that when you click on it, it will disappear. Okay. Now, we know from part 2 of this project that our scene can listen for clicks on desktop, mobile, or VR. Okay. So what we need to do is add something called an event listener to our entity that listens for the click event. The click event fires whenever you click on something, either from your VR controller, your mouse, or on desktop with a touch. It'll fire this event called click. And if you're listening for it, then when you hear it or detect it, you can run a function of your choice. Okay. So first, we need to add the event listener to whatever entity our component is attached to. And as we saw before, we can do that with this. Right? This will reference whatever HTML entity your component happens to be attached to. So just as before, we do this.l. And then instead of set attribute, we want to do a bit of JavaScript called add event listener. And it has parentheses, and then it takes 2 values. The first value will be the name of the event that you're listening for. In this case, we're listening for a click. This can be other things in other contexts. Sometimes you want to listen for a hover. Sometimes you want to listen for a custom event that you've defined somewhere else. But in this case, we want click. And then for the second value, you can put the name of the function that you want to call as soon as that click event happens. So that's where we put disappear func, okay, the name of our function. So we've got this.l.add event listener. The first value is the name of the event and that we're listening for, which is click. And then the second value is the name of the function that you want to call, the stuff that you want to happen as soon as the click is heard. Okay. All right, now let's see if this works, right? And also, I'm going to go ahead and actually just, because we're not using these variables yet, I'm going to go ahead and get rid of them. Okay. All right, looks good. And we do want to make sure that our disappear, remember, we want to make sure our disappear component is actually on some entities in our scene. So I've put it on the floor, and I put it on the walls. Okay, disappear, disappear. It's on all of those, kind of like the architecture for the space. And let's check it out. All right, I'm looking around, and I can click on the floor. You see it disappears. Click on the wall, it disappears. All right. So it works, right? Our function works. Now, it's not very fancy, right? It's not like we can bring those things back, because all our function does right now is it just causes the visibility of this to become false. Okay. Okay, now I know that was a lot of new stuff. I really do encourage you to look below the video where I break it down step by step because it might be more helpful. And then for the challenge for this section, what I'd like you to do is, as another like add-on to this, make it so that when you click on something, it just logs something to the console, right? Make a variable and then log that variable to the console. I want you to really understand how to just make something happen when something is clicked on. So there are a few ways to do this. You can even just throw this inside of your disappear function. You can throw a console.log in here, or you can make a whole new component that does what you want, setting up your own function and your own add event listener. Just do make sure that you remember to import your new JavaScript file into your HTML document, and then also remember to make sure you add your component to an entity in order to actually make it work. Okay, good luck. Please do ask on our online community if you have any questions, and please do also just start up other JavaScript tutorials and other pages that will help you out. Alrighty, good luck writing your first JavaScript function or editing it or what have you, and good luck just kind of making sense of this stuff as well.